Story. Struggling dad rescues drowning twins. In a river unaware, their mom is a billionaire seeking love. The scent of pine and linseed oil was the only luxury Leo Marco could afford. It filled his small apartment, a warm, earthy perfume that clung to his clothes and settled deep into the worn floorboards. In his hands, a block of basswood was slowly, meticulously, taking the shape of a soaring hawk, its wings arched in a silent cry of freedom. The slivers of wood curled away from the blade of his carving knife, falling like soft snow onto the newspaper-covered kitchen table. This was his sanctuary. Here, with a piece of wood and a sharpened tool, he was not a failure. He was a creator. His daughter Maya, 6 years old with eyes the same deep brown as his own, sat cross-legged on the floor, coloring in a book with a concentration that mirrored his own. "Is it done yet, Daddy?" she asked, not looking up from the ferocious purple dragon she was bringing to life. Leo smiled, the expression softening the tired lines around his eyes. "Almost, little bird. A hawk needs to be perfect. It has to be able to see a mouse from a mile away." "Wow," she breathed, finally looking up. "Is that what we're having for dinner?" Leo's chuckle was a low, gentle rumble. "No, thank goodness. We're having pasta. The kind with the squiggly shapes you like." His gaze drifted from her bright, innocent face to the corner of the kitchen counter. There, tucked beneath a chipped ceramic mug, was the dragon he truly fought every day. A stack of envelopes. White manila, some with angry red letters stamped across them. Final notice. Overdue. They were medical bills from 2 years ago, a mountain of debt left behind by the illness that had stolen his wife, Elena. They were utility bills threatening disconnection. A final, stark letter from their landlord. He carved wood to forget the paper that threatened to bury them. Elena had loved his hands. "They're magic, Leo," she used to say, tracing the calluses on his palms. "You can make anything." Before her illness, those hands had made them a good living. He was a master carpenter, sought after for his custom cabinetry and intricate restoration work. He could balance on high scaffolding, command a team, and turn a blueprint into a beautiful reality. Then came the accident. A faulty harness, a 2-story fall. He'd been lucky to walk away with only a fractured leg and a back that now ached with every change in the weather. But the fall had shaken his nerve, and the construction company's insurance had fought him tooth and nail, eventually settling for a paltry sum that barely covered his initial hospital stay. He couldn't trust his body for heavy site work anymore. The magic, it seemed, had its limits. Now, those same hands were relegated to carving small figures he sold at a local craft market for a handful of dollars, barely enough to buy groceries. Each hawk, each bear, each delicate flower was a tiny monument to a life he was supposed to have built. He put the finishing touches on the hawk's wing, the wood now smooth as silk beneath his thumb. He looked at Maya, who was now carefully drawing a tiny crown on her purple dragon. His love for her was a fierce, desperate thing. It was the only fortune he had left, and he would protect it with everything he had. For her, he would face any dragon. He just wished for once the dragon wasn't made of paper. "Okay, little bird," he said, his voice cheerful, betraying none of the weight on his shoulders. "Pasta time. Then we can finish this hawk together." She cheered, scrambling to her feet. As he scooped her up in his arms, her small frame a familiar, comforting weight, he buried his face in her hair. He was failing, but he couldn't let her see it. He just had to hold on a little longer. Miles away, in a world built of glass, steel, and ruthless ambition, Isabella Vance was a hawk of a different kind. She sat at the head of a 30-foot obsidian table, her posture radiating an icy calm that held a dozen powerful executives in rapt attention. "The quarterly projections for the Asian market are not just disappointing, Mark," she said, her voice quiet but cutting through the tension in the boardroom like a shard of glass. "They are lazy. It shows a fundamental lack of foresight that I find personally insulting." Mark Renshaw, her chief operating officer, and a man twice her age, visibly paled. "Isabella, the market fluctuations were unprecedented." "Unprecedented is a word people use when they fail to prepare," she countered, her gaze unwavering. "I don't pay you for excuses. I pay you for results. Fix it. You have 1 week." She stood, a silent signal that the meeting was over. The executives, a collection of men in $1,000 suits, shuffled their papers and filed out of the room, avoiding her eyes. They were afraid of her, and that's how she liked it. Fear was a tool, a motivator. It was reliable. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving her in a sudden, cavernous silence. The mask of the CEO fell away. Isabella's shoulders slumped slightly, and she ran a hand over her face, the perfect makeup doing nothing to hide the profound exhaustion in her soul. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of her corner office, which offered a godlike view of the city sprawling below. She owned this city, in a way. Vance Global's logo was on 3 of the skyscrapers in her line of sight. She could buy anything she could see, and yet she felt nothing. Her phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her thumb hovering over the icon for her email, before swiping to her photo gallery instead. A picture filled the screen, 2 identical little girls with bright, mischievous smiles and matching yellow dresses. Chloe and Zoe, her 6-year-old twins. A pang of guilt, sharp and familiar, pierced through her. She hadn't seen them awake this morning. She likely wouldn't be home in time to tuck them in tonight. Her life was a fortress of her own design, built to keep out the pain of her past. Her divorce from Richard 2 years prior had been a brutal, public affair. He had been charming, handsome, and utterly convincing, and she had allowed herself to believe he loved her, not the Vance name. The discovery of his affairs, plural, and the subsequent legal battle where he tried to claim half her inheritance had shattered that illusion. It had calcified her heart, reinforcing a lesson her cold, demanding father had taught her from birth. Love is a transaction. Trust is a liability. Never let anyone have that kind of power over you. She looked at a framed photo on her desk. It was of her and her father, taken a decade ago. He wasn't smiling. He rarely did. His voice echoed in her memory, a cold, clinical mantra from her childhood. Sentiment will make you weak, Isabella. Your only true assets are your name and your net worth. He had been right, she thought bitterly. Richard had proven him right. Every man she dated since had proven him right. They saw the billion-dollar portfolio, not the woman. They saw a prize to be won, a connection to be leveraged. Another buzz from her phone. A text from Nanny Clara. The girls are asking for you. They miss their mommy. The words hit her harder than any failed market projection. She stared out at the city, at the empire she commanded, and felt an emptiness so vast it threatened to swallow her whole. What was the point of owning the world if you were the only one living in it? On a sudden, fierce impulse, she strode back to her desk and buzzed her assistant. Clear my afternoon, Sarah. But Miss Vance, you have the call with the Tokyo board at 3. Reschedule it, all of it, and have my car brought around to the front in 10 minutes. She hung up before her assistant could reply. She was going to the park. She was going to take her daughters to the riverbank and push their swings and pretend, for just a few hours, that she was a normal mother. She was going to try and feel something real. As she grabbed her purse, she caught her reflection in the dark glass of the window. A powerful, wealthy, successful woman stared back at her. A woman who had everything. A woman who was completely, utterly alone. She just had to hold on a little longer, she told herself, though she no longer knew what she was holding on for. The Riverbend Park was a patchwork quilt of sunlight and shadow, stitched together by the sprawling branches of ancient oak trees. For Leo, it was a welcome escape. He and Maya had claimed a spot on a gentle slope overlooking the water, their checkered blanket, a small island in a sea of green. He watched as Maya, with painstaking effort, arranged a line of daisies on the blanket's edge, narrating a complex story to them that only she could understand. The simplicity of the moment was a balm to his frayed nerves. Here, with the warm sun on his face and his daughter's happy chatter filling the air, the wolves of debt and worry seemed to retreat to the edges of the forest. He wasn't the only one seeking refuge. Further down the path, near a cluster of weeping willows, a scene of frustrated luxury was playing out. Isabella Vance, dressed in casual clothing that cost more than Leo's monthly rent, paced a furious line in the grass, her phone pressed to her ear. Her twin daughters, Chloe and Zoe, were 2 identical bursts of sunshine in their bright yellow dresses, their energy a stark contrast to their mother's rigid tension. Mark, I don't want to hear it, Isabella snapped into the phone, her voice a low, controlled hiss. I told you, this afternoon is off limits. Handle the Henderson merger yourself. That is precisely what I pay you for. She ended the call with a sharp tap of her finger, jamming the phone into her pocket as if it were a weapon she was reluctantly sheathing. She forced a smile, turning to her daughters. Okay, my little butterflies. Who wants to race to the big tree? The girls shrieked with delight, but her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Her mind was still back in the boardroom, dissecting profit margins and potential liabilities. Leo watched them from a distance, a faint pang of sympathy mixing with his curiosity. The woman was wound as tight as a watch spring. Her daughters, however, seemed oblivious. They chased each other in giddy circles, their laughter like the chiming of small bells. They were the same age as Maya, and he felt a familiar ache for the playmates his daughter didn't have. Isabella's phone buzzed again. She pulled it out with a groan of exasperation. "What is it now, Mark?" As she turned her back to the river, her attention fully consumed by the crisis of the hour, the twins found a new source of fascination. A monarch butterfly, its wings a brilliant tapestry of orange and black, fluttered just ahead of them. In a silent, shared agreement, they began to stalk it. The butterfly led them on a merry chase, dancing on the air, weaving through the tall grass, leading them ever closer to the river's edge, where the ground was dark and damp. The bank was steeper than it looked, slick with moss and recent rain. The butterfly paused, resting on a reed that bent over the water. Chloe, her eyes locked on her prize, took one more eager step. Her foot slid out from under her. There was no time to cry out, only a gasp as she tumbled forward. Her hand, in a desperate, reflexive motion, shot out and grabbed the hem of her sister's dress. For a split second, Zoe teetered on the brink, her eyes wide with surprise, before the weight of her falling sister pulled her in too. The splash was shockingly loud in the quiet afternoon. The world seemed to fracture. The joyful giggles were replaced by thin, terrified screams that clawed at the air. "Mommy, help!" The sound hit Leo like a physical blow. His head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. His gaze swept the area and found the source. Two small yellow shapes, thrashing in the churning brown water, their heads bobbing, disappearing, then reappearing. Everything slowed down and sharpened. He saw Isabella, her back still to the river, completely unaware. He saw Maya, her face confused and scared. He saw two children drowning. There was no thought, there was only instinct. "Maya," he said, his voice low and urgent, his eyes never leaving the water. "Stay right here on the blanket. Do not move. Do you understand me?" She nodded, her eyes wide as saucers. He was already on his feet, kicking off his worn sneakers. He didn't feel the sticks and stones under his feet as he sprinted the 30 yards to the riverbank. The cold was a violent shock as he dove in, the impact driving the air from his lungs. The current was stronger than he expected, a greedy, muscular thing that immediately tried to drag him downstream, away from the girls. He fought it, his arms and legs pumping, his muscles screaming in protest. The water was murky, and for a terrifying second, he lost sight of them. Then he saw a flash of yellow. He lunged, his fingers catching on the fabric of a dress. He pulled one girl, sputtering and coughing, towards him, tucking her head into the crook of his arm. She was impossibly heavy, a dead weight of waterlogged clothes and panic. "It's okay, I've got you," he yelled, his voice hoarse. "My sister!" She choked, pointing a trembling hand. He saw Zoe a few feet away, her struggles growing weaker. He lunged again, his already burning muscles straining with the effort of holding onto one child while reaching for the other. His fingers brushed against her arm, slipped, then found purchase. Now he had them both, one under each arm, their small bodies clinging to him like anchors. The weight was immense, the current was relentless. For a terrifying moment, he thought all three of them would be pulled under. He kicked furiously, aiming for the shore, his vision starting to blur at the edges. It was only then that Isabella heard. The screams finally pierced the bubble of her phone call. She turned, a flicker of annoyance on her face that instantly transformed into a mask of pure, primal horror. The phone dropped from her hand, forgotten in the grass. The Henderson merger, the quarterly projections, her entire empire, it all evaporated into nothing. The only thing in the world was the sight of her two daughters in the river, being held by a stranger. "Zoe!" The scream was ripped from her soul, a sound of raw animal terror. She ran, stumbling toward the riverbank just as Leo, with one final desperate heave, managed to push both girls onto the muddy shore. They crawled onto the grass, coughing and crying. Leo followed, hauling his exhausted body from the water and collapsing onto his hands and knees, gasping for breath and spitting out river water. Isabella didn't even see him. She fell to the ground, scrambling to her daughters, pulling them into an embrace so tight it was almost painful. She was no longer a CEO. She was no longer a Vance. She was a mother, frantic and hysterical, checking them for injuries, kissing their wet heads, her body shaking uncontrollably. My babies, you're okay, you're okay," she chanted, the words a desperate litany. Sirens wailed in the distance, a sound that seemed to come from another world. People were gathering, their faces a mix of shock and concern. Paramedics arrived, their calm professionalism a stark contrast to the scene's raw emotion. They gently pried the twins from Isabella's grasp, wrapping them in thick, warm blankets and checking their vitals. They were shaken, cold, but miraculously unharmed. As the chaos began to subside, Isabella finally looked up. Her gaze fell on Leo, who was now sitting up, shivering, his wet clothes plastered to his skin, with a small, dark-haired girl standing frozen beside him. His daughter. Her mind struggled to process it. This man, this stranger had saved them. While she was on the phone, the guilt was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She rose to her feet, her legs unsteady, and walked toward him. All the power, all the icy control that defined her existence was gone. Her face was stripped bare, revealing a vulnerability no one had seen in years. Her voice, when she spoke, was a trembling whisper. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling pitifully inadequate. "Oh my God, thank you. You saved them. You saved my children." Leo looked up, his face pale and exhausted. He saw the terror still lingering in her eyes, the raw gratitude. He saw a mother. "I'm just glad they're okay," he managed, his voice raspy. He pulled Maya closer to his side. "Please," Isabella insisted, her voice gaining a sliver of its usual command, though it was still fragile. "You must let me. I have to do something. A reward. Anything." Leo slowly shook his head. The idea of taking money for this felt profane. "That's not necessary." Anyone would have done the same. His simple, sincere refusal stunned her. In her life, everything had a price. Every action had a motive. This man's quiet humility was something so foreign it felt like it belonged to another species. She looked at his worn jeans, his thin shirt, the exhaustion etched on his face, and she knew he was not a man of means. Yet he asked for nothing. "No, I insist," she stammered, then changed her approach. She couldn't let him just walk away. It felt wrong. Unfinished. "At least, please give me your number. I need to thank you properly when things have calmed down. I need to know your name." He hesitated for a second, then nodded. In that moment, something shifted between them. The class divide, the social gulf, all of it vanished, replaced by a spark of pure, unvarnished human connection. "It's Leo," he said, his voice growing stronger. He placed a protective hand on his daughter's head. "And this is Maya. I'm Isabella." She offered her name as if it were the only thing of value she had to give. As the paramedics began to lead her and the twins toward the waiting ambulance, she looked back at him one last time, her gaze locking with his. The river had almost been a thief, but in its turbulent waters, something entirely unexpected had just been forged. Sleep did not come for Isabella Vance. Long after the doctors had checked the twins and her nanny had settled them into their beds, Isabella wandered the cavernous, sterile silence of her mansion. The moonlight streaming through the two-story windows illuminated dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny ghost of a what if. What if he hadn't been there? What if he hadn't been so quick? What if she'd been 2 seconds later in turning around? The questions were a relentless tide, pulling her under into a dark ocean of guilt and terror. At 3 a.m., she stood in the doorway of her daughter's bedroom. Chloe and Zoe were curled together in a single bed, their breathing soft and even. Chloe murmured in her sleep, a small whimper that caused Isabella's heart to seize. She walked over and smoothed the hair from her daughter's forehead, her touch infinitely gentle. The warmth of her daughter's skin was the only real thing in a world of abstract valuations and stock prices. This man, Leo, had given this back to her. He had handed her the entire world, wrapped in a checkered picnic blanket, and her offer of a reward suddenly felt shamefully small, like offering a handful of pebbles to a king. Returning to the cold marble of her study, she sat down at her desk. Her world operated on a simple principle. Every value could be quantified. Every problem had a price. Gratitude was an emotion, and emotions were inefficient. But a debt was a tangible thing, and the debt she owed Leo was astronomical. She picked up her phone. Her first call was to her head of security, a former Mossad agent who could find anyone. "I have a name and a daughter's name," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "Leo and Maya. They were at Riverbend Park this afternoon. Find out everything. His address, his job, his financial situation. I want a full, discreet report on my desk by morning. I am not asking, David." Her second call was to her private wealth manager. "Arthur, I need you to draw a cashier's check from my personal account," she commanded, staring out at the perfectly manicured, soulless expanse of her back garden. "I'll give you the amount in a moment. I want it ready for pickup at 9 a.m. sharp." She paused, calculating. What was the price for 2 lives? For the future of her lineage? For silencing the screaming voice of guilt in her own head? She named a figure with 7 digits, an amount that would be a rounding error for her but a tectonic shift for anyone else. It felt clean. It felt final. It was the only way she knew how to say thank you. The next morning, the sun rising over Leo's apartment building did little to burn off the chill of his reality. The surreal, adrenaline-fueled events of the previous day felt like a scene from a movie he'd watched. The memory was hazy, dreamlike, eclipsed by the sharp, immediate anxiety of the envelopes on his counter. The landlord's letter was not a request. It was a demand. He had 5 days. He made breakfast for Maya, reheating the leftover squiggly pasta, and they ate in comfortable silence. He watched her meticulously spear each piece with her fork, her small brow furrowed in concentration. How could he tell her they might have to leave the only home she had ever known? He hadn't told anyone about the rescue. Who would he tell? His friends from the construction site had drifted away after his accident. His family was back in the old country. To speak of it felt like bragging about something that wasn't a choice. It was like a firefighter boasting about running into a burning building. You just did it. After dropping Maya at her small public school, he returned to the apartment and sat at the kitchen table, the half-finished wooden hawk staring at him with its unblinking, carved eyes. He opened his laptop and began the familiar, soul-crushing ritual of scrolling through job boards. Carpenter needed, must have owned truck. Framers wanted, heavy lifting required. Handyman must be fully insured. Each listing was a door he couldn't quite open. He was so engrossed in his search that he didn't hear the car at first. It wasn't the sound of the engine, it was the sudden, unnatural silence it imposed on the street. The usual noises of city life, a distant siren, kids shouting, the rumble of a passing bus seemed to fall away, creating a vacuum of awe. He glanced out the window and his breath caught. Parked directly in front of his crumbling brick apartment building was a Bentley. It wasn't just a car, it was a declaration. It was long, black, and so polished it reflected the gritty urban landscape around it in a warped, glossy sheen. A man in a crisp black suit stood by the passenger door, his posture rigid. As Leo watched, the chauffeur opened the door. Isabelle Lavance stepped out. Even in tailored trousers and a silk blouse, she looked as out of place as a diamond in a coal bin. She looked up at the building, her expression unreadable, before her eyes landed on him through the window. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then, with a clear sense of purpose, she walked toward the entrance of his building. A jolt of panic went through Leo. He quickly shut his laptop, his mind racing. Why was she here? Was something wrong with the girls? He met her at the door to his apartment just as she was about to knock. "Isabella?" he said, his voice betraying his surprise. Are they okay?" "They're fine," she said, her voice softer than he remembered from the boardroom of his imagination. "They slept through the night. I'm here because of you." He stepped aside, a gesture of invitation into his cramped living room, which also served as his workshop and dining room. He was suddenly acutely aware of the clutter, the scent of sawdust, the faded floral pattern on the sofa. She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the room. It wasn't a look of judgment, but one of quiet observation. She took in the carvings on the mantelpiece, the stack of Maya's drawings taped to the wall, the worn but loving details of his life. "I told you I wanted to thank you properly," she said, turning back to him. Her composure was back, but there was an uncertainty in her eyes that hadn't been there before. She held out a thick, cream-colored envelope. "This is for you." Leo looked at the envelope, then at her. He didn't need to see inside to feel its weight. I told you, that's not necessary. Please, she insisted, for my own peace of mind. What you did, it has a value I can't comprehend. But this is my attempt. It would help you. Help your daughter. As she spoke, his eyes drifted past her shoulder to the small second-hand television flickering in the corner. It was tuned to a 24-hour news channel, and on the screen was her face, part of a segment on market movers. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, Billionaire CEO Isabella Vance announces record profits for Vance Global. The name hit him like a physical shock. Vance Global. He'd seen their logo on construction sites, on tech ads, on half the buildings downtown. He looked from the impossibly wealthy, powerful woman on the television screen to the very real, very vulnerable woman standing in his living room, holding an envelope that likely contained more money than he would see in 10 lifetimes. It all clicked into place. The car, the clothes, the immediate offer of a reward. A cold feeling washed over him. It wasn't anger exactly. It was a profound sense of misunderstanding. She wasn't just a grateful mother. She was a billionaire trying to settle a debt. She was trying to put his actions on a balance sheet to close the account so she could move on. She was trying to buy his heroism. He looked at the envelope and then met her eyes. His own gaze clear and steady. He slowly shook his head. I can't take this, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Leo, please don't be proud. It's not about pride, he interrupted, his tone gentle but unyielding. I didn't do it for money. My wife, Elena, she used to say that some things in life are clean. Simple. You see someone who needs help, you help them. The moment you put a price on it, it becomes dirty. It becomes a transaction. He pushed the envelope gently back toward her. I didn't save your daughters for a fee, Isabella. I won't take one now. Isabella stared at him, speechless. The phrase, it becomes a transaction, struck her with the force of a physical blow, because her entire life was a series of transactions. His refusal wasn't an act of pride. It was a judgment on her entire way of life. This man, with his dusty workshop and his overdue bills, was operating on a moral code so far removed from her own that she felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He had nothing, yet he was turning down everything. Because it was clean. For the first time in a decade, a powerful CEO felt truly humbled. Her grand gesture, her seven-figure solution, had been cheapened by his simple integrity. She slowly retracted her hand, the envelope feeling heavy and vulgar. I'm sorry, she said, and it was the most genuine apology she had ever uttered. I didn't mean to offend you. You didn't, he said, but you need to understand. What I did, it wasn't for sale. A long silence hung between them, filled with the quiet ticking of a clock on the wall. Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not a project or a problem to be solved, but a man of deep, unshakable principle. It was both terrifying and utterly fascinating. Okay, she finally whispered, her corporate armor completely gone. She tucked the envelope back into her purse, a symbol of her defeat. Then let me thank you another way. She looked around the apartment, then back at him. Can I buy you a cup of coffee? A real one this time. No checks, no business calls, just coffee. A slow smile spread across Leo's face, reaching his eyes. It was a truce, an offer to speak the same language. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that very much. They chose a small cafe 3 blocks from Leo's apartment called The Daily Grind. It was a place of comforting anonymity, with the rich, dark scent of roasted coffee beans and baking cinnamon clinging to the air. The furniture was a collection of mismatched wooden tables and chairs, each scarred with the history of countless conversations. For Leo, it was familiar territory. For Isabella, it was like stepping into a foreign country. There was no valet, no maitre d', no hushed reverence. There was just the cheerful hiss of an espresso machine and the low hum of everyday life. She had insisted on leaving the Bentley parked a street away, a concession that spoke volumes. Still, as she slid into the booth opposite him, she looked like a monarch trying to blend in at a peasant's market, effortful and not entirely successful. A palpable awkwardness settled between them, as thick as the steam rising from their coffee mugs. She broke the silence first, reverting to the language she knew best. Your carvings, she began, her tone possessing the faint, analytical edge of a venture capitalist assessing an asset. The ones in your apartment, They're remarkable. The detail, the life you put into them, that's a marketable skill set. Have you considered scaling up? Creating a brand? Leo wrapped his hands around his warm mug, the ceramic of familiar comfort. He understood she was trying to connect, but her words felt like they were coming from a different dialect. I don't really think of it like that, he answered honestly. It's more about the feel of it, finding the shape that's already hiding inside the wood. It's quiet work. It calms my hands. But quiet doesn't pay the bills, she countered, then immediately softened her tone, realizing how transactional it sounded. I'm sorry, I just mean, you have a gift. It seems like it's being undervalued. Maybe, he conceded with a small shrug, but some things are worth more than what someone will pay for them. The words hung in the air, a gentle echo of his refusal in the apartment. He was speaking a language of intrinsic value, while she spoke the language of market value. They were talking about the same thing, his talent, but from opposite sides of an immense canyon. An uncomfortable silence fell again. She stirred her cappuccino, the clinking of her spoon against the porcelain unnaturally loud. She felt a frustrating sense of ineptitude. She could command a boardroom of 100 people, but she couldn't navigate a simple conversation with one man. She decided to try a different approach, a more personal one. Maya's mother, she began, her voice hesitant. You mentioned her. Elena, was she an artist too? Leo's expression changed. The guardedness faded, replaced by a warmth that seemed to emanate from deep within him. A genuine, unburdened smile touched his lips. No, God, no, he chuckled, a rich, full sound. Elena couldn't draw a straight line with a ruler, but she was an artist of a different kind. She was a landscape architect. Not the kind that designs fancy gardens for rich people, but the kind that works for the city, trying to turn abandoned lots into community parks. He leaned back, a nostalgic light in his eyes. She used to drag me out to these miserable, forgotten places, a patch of cracked asphalt behind a warehouse, a strip of dirt by the highway. And while I'd see nothing but weeds and trash, she'd see everything. She'd stand there, hands on her hips, and say, Leo, picture it. A bench right here under a cherry tree. A sandbox for the little ones over there. We'll plant sunflowers along that fence. She could see the beauty in things nobody else thought was worth looking at. She built things that mattered. He paused, looking down into his coffee. She was the one who taught me there's no such thing as scrap wood, just pieces waiting for a new purpose. She was the best person I ever knew. He spoke of her not with the sharp, cutting grief of a recent wound, but with the profound, steady ache of a love that had become a part of him, like a phantom limb that still held warmth. Isabella listened, utterly captivated. She had never heard anyone speak about a loved one like that. In her world, past relationships were liabilities, ex-spouses were adversaries, and love was a vulnerability to be guarded against. Leo's tribute to his wife was so pure, so devoid of bitterness, that it exposed the poverty of her own emotional landscape. He had lost the love of his life, and yet he was richer than she had ever been. A piece of her carefully constructed armor cracked. My husband, she said, the words coming out before she could stop them, used to say he loved me. What he loved was the idea of me. He loved my name, my access, the way my presence changed the atmosphere of a room when I walked in. He loved me like a man loves a prize-winning racehorse. A beautiful, valuable asset to have in his stable. Her voice was low and devoid of self-pity, stated as a simple, painful fact. The cage I live in is beautiful. It's gilded, it's comfortable, it's the envy of the world. But it's still a cage, and I spend all my time reinforcing the bars, thinking it will keep me safe, when all it really does is keep me alone. It was the most honest thing she had said to anyone, besides her therapist, in years. She had revealed a sliver of her own scrap wood, her own forgotten, neglected patch of soul. Leo didn't offer pity. He simply nodded, a look of quiet understanding on his face. He recognized the truth in her words. And in that shared moment of vulnerability, the canyon between them began to feel less vast. To break the emotional intensity, Leo shifted the subject. Your girls, Chloe and Zoe, they're full of fire. Isabella's face transformed. The mention of her daughters instantly erased the weary CEO and replaced her with a tired but adoring mother. A real smile, the first one he had truly seen, lit up her eyes. You have no idea, she laughed. A genuine musical sound. Chloe is the lawyer. The other day, she tried to negotiate a later bedtime by presenting me with a list of precedents, citing times I had let them stay up to finish a movie. She argued that a consistent application of household law was crucial for morale. Leo threw his head back and laughed. Wow, I'm not sure I could handle that. Maya's main negotiation tactic involves an imaginary friend, a squirrel named Sir Reginald, who apparently has very strong opinions about the necessity of ice cream for dinner. Sir Reginald? Isabella asked, jiggling. Does he wear a tiny monocle? Naturally, Leo deadpanned. And he claims that nuts are a gateway vegetable to broccoli, which is why they must be avoided at all costs. It's a very sophisticated argument. They were both laughing now. A real, unburdened sound that turned heads in the quiet cafe. The tension had vanished, washed away by a shared current of parental absurdity. In that moment, they weren't a billionaire and a carpenter. They were just a mom and a dad, united by the baffling, frustrating, all-consuming love they had for their 6-year-old daughters. They had found their common language. As their laughter subsided, a comfortable, easy silence settled between them. The coffee was getting cold. They should meet, Isabella said, the idea suddenly feeling like the most natural thing in the world. The girls, I mean. Chloe and Zoe would be fascinated by Sir Reginald. And I have a feeling Maya would find a worthy legal adversary in Chloe, Leo agreed, a smile still playing on his lips. Come over to the house on Saturday, she offered, the invitation easy and informal. All of you. We can have lunch. The girls can play. No agenda. No transactions. She said the last word with a hint of self-awareness, a nod to their earlier conversation. Leo looked at her, at the genuine warmth that had replaced the icy caution in her eyes. He saw the woman, not the billionaire. We'd like that, he said. We'd like that a lot. As they left the cafe and walked their separate ways, a fragile bridge had been built between their two worlds, constructed not of money or power, but of shared laughter and the quiet admission of a lonely heart. The invitation came via a text message, a simple string of words that felt impossibly complex to Leo. Come over Saturday, around noon. The girls are so excited to see Maya. And you? He stared at the message for a long time. Part of him, the weary, pragmatic part that counted pennies for groceries, screamed that this was a mistake. He was a rowboat, and she was a super yacht. Getting too close meant risking being swamped by her wake. He belonged to a world of sawdust and splintered wood, not whatever world she inhabited. But then there was Maya. When he mentioned a possible playdate with the girls from the park, her entire face had lit up like a city skyline at dusk. She had so few friends, her life circumscribed by the 4 walls of their apartment and the asphalt of her school playground. The chance for her to run on a real lawn, to play with other children, was a gift he couldn't deny her, no matter how much it terrified him. For Maya's sake, he would brave the gilded cage. On Saturday, he dressed Maya in her favorite sundress, the one with the little embroidered ladybugs. He put on his best jeans, the ones without any paint stains, and a clean-pressed button-down shirt. As they climbed into his beat-up, 10-year-old pickup truck, the engine rumbling to life with a familiar cough, he felt a profound sense of inadequacy. He was driving a relic to a palace. The address led them to a part of the city he had only ever seen in magazines. The streets were wide and clean, hidden from public view by towering hedges and imposing stone walls. He turned onto a private road, and the world changed. Finally, he pulled up to a set of colossal iron gates. After he stated his name into a sleek, featureless intercom, the gates swung inward with a silent, intimidating grace. The driveway was a quarter-mile long, winding through a landscape so perfectly manicured it looked unreal. And then the house came into view. It wasn't a house, it was a statement. A monument of glass, white stone, and sharp geometric angles, it looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum. It was stunningly beautiful and profoundly cold. "Daddy," Maya whispered from her passenger seat, her face pressed against the window. "Is this a castle?" "Something like that, sweetie," Leo murmured, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. Isabella was waiting for them at the front door. She was dressed in simple white linen pants and a soft cashmere sweater, an obvious attempt to appear casual. But she was framed by an entrance so grand it looked like the gate to a cathedral. She smiled, a genuinely warm expression that was at war with the intimidating backdrop. "You made it. We're so glad you came. The moment Maya was out of the truck, two identical figures in pink dresses burst from the house, their excited squeals echoing in the vast entryway. He's here. The river hero is here, Chloe announced. And you brought your little girl? Zoe added, running straight up to Maya. I'm Zoe, that's Chloe. Do you want to see our playroom? It has a real slide. Maya, usually shy, was swept up in their whirlwind of energy. Within 60 seconds, the three of them were a chattering, giggling unit, holding hands and running back into the house, their small voices swallowed by the immense space. Leo and Isabella were left standing alone in the entryway, the sudden silence highlighting the palpable distance between them. Well, Isabella said with a small, amused smile. That was easy. They seem to have it handled, Leo agreed, though his heart was pounding. She led him through the house. The inside was even more breathtaking and impersonal than the outside. The ceilings were 30 feet high. The furniture was sparse and sculptural. A grand piano sat untouched in one corner. Art that he was sure cost more than he'd make in a lifetime hung on the vast white walls. There were no family photos, no clutter, no signs of the messy, chaotic business of living. It was a showpiece. He felt like he should have wiped his feet for an hour before entering. It's something, he said, the word wholly insufficient. It's my father's taste, she replied, a hint of something unreadable in her voice. He believed a home should project power, not comfort. She led him toward a wall of glass that overlooked an Olympic-sized swimming pool and a lawn that rolled away like a green carpet toward the distant river. Can I get you something to drink? Before he could answer, the smooth crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced another arrival. A low-slung, silver Aston Martin pulled up behind Leo's dusty truck, the contrast almost comical. Isabella's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. I wasn't expecting anyone. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was tall, sharp, and handsome in a severe way, dressed in a suit so perfectly tailored it looked like it was sewn onto him. His shoes gleamed. He moved with the effortless confidence of a man who had never once in his life wondered if he belonged in a room. Mark, Isabella said, her voice tight with annoyance as he strode in. I told you I was taking the day. And a well-deserved day it is. The man, Mark Renshaw, said smoothly, his eyes flicking from Isabella to Leo. The smile on his face was polished, but it didn't reach his eyes. His gaze was quick and dissecting, an instant appraisal that took in Leo's worn jeans, his simple shirt, his calloused hands. In that split second, Leo felt he had been weighed, measured, and dismissed. I was just on my way to the club and wanted to drop off the revised schematics for the Tokyo project, Mark continued, holding up a sleek leather portfolio. I thought you'd want to see them before Monday. It was a transparently weak excuse for showing up uninvited. This is Leo Marco, Isabella said, her tone forcing a civility she clearly didn't feel. Leo, this is Mark Renshaw, my coup. Ah, Mark said, extending a hand to Leo. His grip was firm, brief, and cool. The man of the hour, the hero of Riverbend Park. It's a pleasure. The words were correct, but the tone was laced with something that felt like condescension. It was the way one might speak to a briefly interesting curiosity. Quite a story. The entire office is buzzing about it. Oh, I just did what anyone would have, Leo said, his standard reply feeling flimsy and inadequate under Mark's assessing gaze. Few would have the courage, I assure you, Mark said, turning his attention back to Isabella, effectively dismissing Leo from the conversation. Isabella, may I have a quick word? About the Henderson deal. A minor complication has arisen. It was a power play, clear and simple. He was re-establishing the hierarchy, reminding both Leo and Isabella of his importance, of his intimate involvement in the world where she held power, and Leo was an outsider. Just then, the girls came running back into the room, their faces flushed with excitement, Maya firmly in tow. Mommy, can we show Maya the ponies? Chloe asked. Ponies? Maya whispered, her eyes as wide as dinner plates. Of course, sweetie, Isabella said, her attention shifting gratefully to the children. The stables are just past the pool. As the girls scampered off again, Mark seized the opportunity. He stepped closer to Isabella, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial murmur, believing they were out of earshot. But Leo, who was only a few feet away watching Maya, caught the words clearly. Quite the career move, Mark murmured, his voice dripping with a silken, poisonous insinuation. From carpenter to professional hero, the returns on this one must be staggering. You must be careful, Isabella. People in his position can be aspirational. The air went cold. The comment was a perfectly aimed dart, designed to inject the poison of doubt directly into Isabella's mind. It reframed Leo's selfless act as a calculated, opportunistic ploy. Isabella's jaw tightened. A flash of cold fury lit her eyes. "That is both offensive and entirely out of line, Mark." She snapped back, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. "He is a guest in my home. You will treat him with respect." "Of course," Mark said, raising his hands in a gesture of mock surrender, his expression unchanged. "I am merely looking out for you, as your father always instructed me to." Leo stood frozen, the blood roaring in his ears. He hadn't been meant to hear, but he had. He saw the entire chessboard laid bare. Mark, the self-appointed Queen's Guard. Himself, the unexpected and unwelcome pawn. He felt a hot flush of shame and anger. He didn't belong here. He was a complication, a curiosity, a potential threat to be managed. The easy warmth of the day had evaporated, leaving a bitter chill in its wake. This wasn't a castle. It was a fortress. And he had just met the man guarding the walls. Mark Renshaw left as smoothly as he had arrived, his Aston Martin disappearing down the long driveway like a silver ghost. But he had left something behind, a toxic residue that coated the pristine air of Isabella's home. The easy laughter of the afternoon was gone, replaced by a brittle, unspoken tension. Isabella tried to salvage the day. She forced a smile, suggested a tour of the stables, and enthused over the ponies with a brightness that felt thin and fragile. Leo played his part, admiring the immaculate stables and asking Maya if she wanted to learn to ride someday. But the connection they had forged in the cozy, anonymous cafe felt a million miles away. Mark's words hung between them, an invisible wall of glass. People in his position can be aspirational. The phrase echoed in Leo's mind, rebranding his poverty as a motive and his presence as a ploy. He watched Isabella as she interacted with her daughters. He saw the genuine love there, but now he also saw the CEO. He saw the woman who lived in a fortress, and he was acutely aware that he was a foreign element within its walls, a security risk to be assessed. The visit ended shortly after. The drive home was quiet, Leo's mind churning, the grand house receding in his rearview mirror like a receding dream. Maya, oblivious, chattered happily about the ponies, her joy a stark and painful contrast to his own gnawing unease. For Isabella, the poison began its slow work. That night, alone in her cavernous study, Mark's voice became indistinguishable from the voice of her father and the voice of her ex-husband, Richard. Aspirational. Richard had been aspirational. He had aspired to her fortune, her status, her power. He had played the part of the devoted lover perfectly, all while strategically leveraging her name to build his own failed business ventures. She shook her head, angry at herself. Leo was not Richard. Leo had saved her children. He had refused a life-changing amount of money on a principle she barely understood. But Mark, ever the strategist, did not let the wound close. 2 days later, a slim, encrypted file arrived in her private email. The subject line was innocuous. Following up, the file was from Mark. Inside was a discreetly compiled report on one Leo Marco. It wasn't salacious or overtly damning. It was worse. It was a simple, factual portrait of desperation. It detailed his on-the-job accident, the meager insurance settlement, the subsequent loss of his high-paying carpentry career. It listed the stack of outstanding medical bills from his late wife's illness. It noted 2 recent final notices from utility companies. Most damningly, it included a copy of the eviction warning from his landlord. The report was presented without comment, but the implication was clear and devastating. This is his reality. This is his motive. A man this desperate doesn't act without a reason. You are his lottery ticket. Isabella stared at the screen, her blood running cold. She thought of Leo in his cramped apartment, his quiet dignity, his talk of clean and simple actions. Was it all a performance? An incredibly convincing, long con, played by a man with nothing left to lose? Had he researched her? Had he known who she was that day at the park? The ugly thoughts, once dismissed, now took root in the fertile ground of her past betrayals. She began to watch him through this new, tainted lens. When he called that evening, his cheerful, "How are the girls?" was met with a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation on her end. "They're fine, Leo." "We're fine," she said, her tone professional. "I was thinking," he said. "Maya hasn't stopped talking about the ponies. I'd love to take you all out for pizza sometime this week. My treat. To thank you for having us." A week ago, she would have found the offer charming, a sweet gesture of reciprocity. Now, with the knowledge of his eviction notice burning in her mind, it sounded pathetic. A man who couldn't pay his rent was offering to buy her pizza. Was it a point of pride, or was it part of the act, to maintain the fiction that they were equals? "That's a kind thought, Leo, but this week is very busy for me," she said, the corporate chill creeping back into her voice. "Perhaps another time." The line went quiet for a moment. She could almost feel his confusion, his hurt, through the phone. She had just built a wall, and he had walked right into it. Leo felt the wall go up as surely as if she'd laid a line of bricks between them. Her tone was different, distant. The easy warmth was gone. He hung up the phone, feeling a familiar, sinking feeling in his gut, the feeling of being on the outside looking in. His own doubts began to fester. The encounter with Mark had been a splash of cold water, reminding him of his place. He looked around his apartment, at the peeling paint on the window frames and the worn-out sofa, and saw it not as a home filled with love, but as a testament to his failure. How could he possibly belong in her world? His fears were cemented the following weekend. Isabella called, her voice once again friendly, but with an undercurrent he couldn't quite place. She was hosting a small, informal gathering at her home, a last-minute fundraiser for the city's art museum. She insisted it was no big deal, just a few friends, and she wanted him and Maya to come. It would be good for the girls to play again. Reluctantly, Leo agreed. He told himself it was for Maya. The moment they arrived, he knew it was a mistake. The small gathering was a collection of 50 of the city's wealthiest patrons. Women drifted across the marble floors in designer dresses and glittering jewelry. Men in bespoke jackets stood in clusters, swirling glasses of what Leo was sure was obscenely expensive wine. The air hummed with the quiet confidence of inherited wealth and effortless power. Leo felt like he was wearing a neon sign that read, "Does not belong." He clutched a glass of sparkling water, trying to make himself invisible near the edge of the sprawling patio. Maya had thankfully been whisked away by the twins to some far-off corner of the mansion, but that left Leo alone and exposed. Isabella was in her element, moving through the crowd with grace and authority, a queen in her court. She tried to include him, introducing him to a stern-faced banking executive and his impossibly polished wife. "This is Leo Marco," Isabella said warmly. "He's a very talented wood artist." The couple looked at him with polite, vacant smiles. "How charming," the woman said, her eyes scanning him from head to toe before dismissing him and turning back to Isabella to discuss an upcoming auction in Monaco. Leo excused himself and retreated further into the shadows of the garden. It was there, standing near a sculpted hedge, that the whispers reached him. He wasn't meant to hear them. Two women, holding champagne flutes, were speaking in low, confidential tones. "Is that him?" one of them asked. "The one who pulled the girls out of the river?" "Yes," the other replied. "Isabella's new project. It's sweet, really, in a charity sort of way. A bit like adopting a stray, isn't it? Apparently he's completely broke. Well, he's landed on his feet, hasn't he? I mean, talk about a heroic act paying dividends. Richard must be spinning in his grave." The words were like tiny, sharp needles, piercing his pride. Her new project. Adopting a stray. They didn't see a man. They saw a story. A transaction. A charity case who had cleverly leveraged a heroic moment into a winning lottery ticket. They saw him exactly the way Mark Renshaw saw him. A cold dread washed over him. He wasn't just worried about himself anymore. He was worried about Maya. What would this world do to her? Would she grow up feeling like the poor friend, the charity case? Would she learn to measure her own worth by the price tag on her clothes or the size of her house? The thought was unbearable. His simple, love-filled life with her suddenly seemed like a precious, fragile thing he needed to protect at all costs from the corrosive influence of this place. He found Isabella, his face a tight mask of courtesy. "It's getting late," he said, his voice strained. I should get Maya home. Oh, already? Isabella said, distracted by another guest pulling at her elbow. Of course, I'll have Nanny Clara find the girls. There was no protest, no insistence he stay longer. She was already half turned away from him, absorbed back into her world. The distance between them had become a chasm. Driving home in the dark, with Maya asleep in the seat beside him, Leo made a decision. He had to pull back. He had to protect his daughter and his own dignity. He couldn't be her project. He couldn't be the stray she had adopted. The risk was too great. The poison of whispers was too potent. And he was afraid, for the first time, that it might be contagious. The silence that followed was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Leo stopped calling. When Isabella texted, his replies were polite, brief, and non-committal. An invitation for the girls to play was met with a gentle excuse. Maya has a bit of a cold. Maybe next week. But next week never came. He was building a wall of his own, brick by painful brick, creating a distance he felt was necessary for survival. He poured his frustration, his hurt, and his wounded pride into his work. The small apartment became a hive of activity. The scent of cut wood was thick in the air from dawn until long after Maya was asleep. He was not just carving, he was building a defense. For Isabella, the silence was a confirmation of her worst fears. His withdrawal, viewed through the cynical filter Mark had provided, looked like the tactic of a spurned opportunist. See? The voice in her head whispered. He realized you weren't going to be his easy ticket, so he vanished. It was all a game. She threw herself back into her work at Vance Global with a vengeance, her days a blur of meetings, conference calls, and ruthless negotiations. She was the ice queen of the boardroom once more, her armor polished and her heart locked safely away. But at night, the silence of her mansion mocked her. She would walk past the twins' playroom and see the expensive, factory-made toys sitting untouched. Chloe and Zoe kept asking about Leo and Maya. When is the river hero coming back, Mommy? Does Maya not like our ponies anymore? Each question was a small crack in the icy facade she had so carefully reconstructed. She found herself thinking of Leo's hands, not in a romantic sense, but with a kind of professional awe. Hands that could pull children from a rushing river and also carve life from a block of wood. It was a combination of strength and tenderness that felt alien in her world of leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. His refusal of her money, which she had first interpreted as pride and then as a clever tactic, now began to trouble her in a different way. It was an anomaly she couldn't categorize, a data point that didn't fit her algorithm of human behavior. One afternoon, nearly 3 weeks after the disastrous fundraiser, Isabella's chauffeur pulled the Bentley up to her front door. But he was not alone. A nondescript delivery van was parked behind him, and the driver was speaking to her head of security at the gate. "Ma'am," the security chief said, approaching her, "there's a delivery for you. A Mr. Leo Marco is requesting permission to bring it to the house." Isabella's heart gave a strange, unfamiliar flutter. A delivery? She gave the approval. The van followed her Bentley up the long driveway. Leo climbed out of the driver's side. He looked tired, older than she remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. But there was a look of quiet, resolute purpose on his face. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't there for a social call. "Isabella," he said, his voice even, "I have something for the girls, and for you." It took me a while to finish. He and the van driver, a friend from his old construction days, went to the back of the van and opened the doors. Isabella watched, mystified. They began to carefully unload several large blanket-wrapped objects. The first piece they brought into the grand, marble-floored entryway was a dollhouse. But to call it a dollhouse was to call a cathedral a church. It was a perfect 1/12 scale miniature of her own mansion. Every geometric angle, every glass wall, every stone terrace was replicated with breathtaking precision. The roof sections came off to reveal tiny rooms, each filled with handcrafted miniature furniture, a grand piano the size of her thumb, a tiny sofa upholstered in a swatch of silk. In the miniature master bedroom, there was even a tiny, perfect replica of the imposing desk from her real study. Chloe and Zoe, drawn by the commotion, came running. They stopped dead, their mouths falling open in silent, reverent awe. "It's our house," Chloe whispered. "But tiny," Zoe added, her eyes wide as the moon. Leo knelt down beside them. "The front door opens," he said softly, "and the lights work." He flicked a tiny, hidden switch, and a warm, golden light filled the miniature house from within, turning the cold, architectural marvel into a warm, inviting home. The girls let out a collective gasp of pure, unadulterated delight. They abandoned their mother's side and swarmed the dollhouse, their hands gently tracing the tiny railings and peering into the minuscule rooms, their chatter a waterfall of joy. Isabella was speechless. She looked from the dollhouse, a creation of such staggering skill and dedication to Leo. This wasn't a gift you could buy. This was a gift of time, of hundreds of hours of painstaking labor. This was a gift of artistry and heart. But he wasn't finished. "This is for you," he said, handing her a flat, rectangular box wrapped in simple brown paper. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of black velvet, was a wooden jewelry box. It was made from a deep, rich cherry wood, polished to a satin sheen, but it was the lid that made her breath catch in her throat. Intricately carved into the surface, woven into a beautiful, flowing design of leaves and vines, were her initials. 4. It wasn't a stamp or a monogram. It was part of the wood itself, a testament to a skill so profound it felt like magic. She ran her thumb over the carving. It was smooth, flawless. This was not a project. This was not the work of a stray. This was the work of an artist, a master of his craft. And it was a message. She finally looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. The cynical voices in her head, Mark's, her father's, her own, fell silent, utterly defeated. No one had ever given her a gift that was so completely and utterly about her. Not her money, not her company, not her name, but her. He had seen the lonely woman inside the glass castle and had built her a bridge made of wood. "Leo," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Why?" "Because of what you thought," he answered, his gaze direct and honest, without a trace of accusation. "And what your friends whispered. I heard them at the party. That I was a project, a charity case, that I was here for the dividends." A hot flush of shame washed over Isabella. "I needed you and your daughters to have something from me that had no price tag," he continued, "something that couldn't be mistaken for a transaction. My hands, my time, that's the only real currency I have. Now my debt is paid, the scales are balanced." He was not there to ask for anything. He was there to close the ledger, to reclaim his dignity, to prove that he was not the man they thought he was. In that moment, everything became crystal clear to Isabella. The weeks of doubt, the poison of Mark's whispers, her own cold withdrawal, it was all a monumental mistake, born of her own fear. This man's integrity was as solid and real as the wood he worked. He wasn't weak or desperate. He was the strongest person she had ever met. "I am so sorry, Leo," she said. And this time the apology was for her own cowardice, her own lack of faith. "I let my past. I let other people's cynicism. I let it blind me. What you heard, it's not true. It's a reflection of them, not of you. I was wrong." He saw the raw sincerity in her eyes, the crumbling of the fortress walls. He saw the woman from the cafe again, the one who spoke of a gilded cage. He gave a slow, weary nod of acceptance. She stepped forward, her hand gently touching the lid of the jewelry box he had made for her. "Your debt wasn't to me, Leo. I think we've both been in a different kind of debt for a long time." He looked past her, at the sight of their 3 daughters. His Maya and her Chloe and Zoe, their heads bent close together, completely absorbed in the tiny, lighted world he had created for them. They weren't a billionaire's twins and a carpenter's daughter. They were just 3 little girls, playing together, their laughter echoing in the vast, silent house. The dollhouse was a perfect symbol, his world, his craft, fitting perfectly inside hers, making it warmer, making it a home. A fragile, tentative smile touched Leo's lips. The bridge he had built was stronger than he knew. It wasn't just made of wood, it was made of hope. The dollhouse and the jewelry box did more than just balance a perceived debt. They demolished the walls between them. The fragile truce forged over coffee was now reinforced with the solid, tangible proof of Leo's character. The weeks that followed were different. The hesitation was gone, replaced by an easy, burgeoning intimacy. Leo and Maya became regular visitors to the glass castle, and slowly, its sterile edges began to soften. Maya's colorful drawings started appearing on the enormous stainless steel refrigerator. Leo, upon discovering a loose hinge on a 17th century armoire, spent a happy afternoon fixing it, his toolbox resting on a priceless Persian rug. He was no longer a guest. He was a presence. Isabella, in turn, began to venture into his world. She would show up at his apartment with a bag of groceries, her Bentley parked unabashedly out front, and they would cook pasta together in his tiny kitchen while Maya showed Chloe and Zoe how to properly color a purple dragon. She saw the eviction notice still tucked on his counter and said nothing, understanding that to offer money now would be to misunderstand everything. Instead, she asked him about the grain of the wood he was carving, listened to his stories about Elena's community gardens, and learned the language of his life. This deepening connection was not lost on Mark Renshaw. From his vantage point inside Vance Global, he watched Isabella's transformation with a growing sense of alarm. He saw her delegating more responsibility, leaving the office at 5 instead of 9, her phone now filled with pictures of 3 little girls playing instead of just 2. He saw a softness in her that he equated with weakness. In his mind, Leo Marco was not a man. He was a virus that had infected the sterile, efficient system he had sworn to protect. The system his mentor, Isabella's father, had built. His whispers had failed, so a bolder, more direct attack was required. He spent a week calling in favors, leveraging his network, and applying the full, ruthless pressure of his position. He compiled a new file, far more insidious than the first. It twisted Leo's reality into a narrative of calculated risk. The report highlighted Leo's mounting debts, framing them not as a result of tragedy, but as a pattern of financial irresponsibility. It included heavily editorialized character references from disgruntled former colleagues, men Mark had likely paid who painted Leo as unreliable since his accident. The centerpiece of the report was a formal-looking risk assessment analysis, filled with charts and projections, concluding that Isabella's public association with a man of such financial and personal instability posed a significant and quantifiable threat to the Vance Global brand and shareholder confidence. It was corporate character assassination, disguised as due diligence. He requested an emergency meeting with the Vance Global Executive Board. The boardroom was as cold and imposing as ever. The 10 board members, all men, all older than Isabella, all appointed by her father, sat around the obsidian table, their faces grim. They were relics of her father's era, men who believed in numbers, not people, and who still viewed her with a vague, paternalistic skepticism. Mark stood at the head of the table, a position he rarely took in Isabella's presence. He presented his findings with cold, clinical precision. As you can see, he concluded, gesturing to the damning final slide of his presentation, Mr. Marco's personal situation presents a clear and present danger. An individual in such a precarious position is susceptible to influence. His association with our CEO, while born from a well-publicized heroic act, now constitutes a major liability. The media could have a field day with this. Imagine the headlines: Billionaire CEO bails out bankrupt boyfriend. It undermines her authority. It undermines this company. He looked directly at Isabella, his expression one of grave, feigned concern. Isabella, this board has a fiduciary duty to protect this company. Your father entrusted me to help you do that. We need to mitigate this risk. We need to sever this connection cleanly and quietly before it impacts the Q4 earnings call. When the room was silent, the board members looked from Mark's compelling, fact-based presentation to Isabella, their expressions a mixture of agreement and concern. They saw a young woman, perhaps blinded by sentiment, making a foolish, risky, emotional investment. Isabella had remained silent throughout the presentation, her face an unreadable mask. She had listened to Mark methodically dismantle the character of the man she had come to care for, twisting his tragedy into a crime. She felt a fury so cold and pure, it was almost calming. He had made a fatal error. He thought he was attacking a weakness. He had, in fact, attacked her strength. She rose slowly from her chair. "Thank you, Mark," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "That was a very thorough presentation." She walked to the front of the room, picked up the remote for the projector, and with a click, the screen went blank. She turned to face the board. "You're right about one thing, Mark," she began. "This board does have a fiduciary duty, but you seem to have forgotten that I am not just the CEO. I am the majority shareholder. This company bears my name. And my name, gentlemen, is not just an asset to be protected. It is a reflection of my judgment. And it is my judgment you are now calling into question. She addressed the entire board. The risk you see in these manufactured reports is a man who lost his wife to cancer and was then crippled by a workplace accident. The financial instability you see is a father struggling to pay off the medical debt that his country's healthcare system failed to cover. The unreliability you see is a man who dove into a freezing river to save my children's lives without a moment's hesitation, asking for nothing in return. Her voice gained strength with every word, ringing with a conviction they had not heard from her before. You see a liability. I see a man of more integrity, honor, and courage than anyone else in this room. You see a threat to our brand. I see the man who reminded me what my own life is for. She then turned her gaze fully on Mark, and the temperature in the room dropped by 20 degrees. And you, Mark, she said, her voice laced with ice. My father entrusted you to be my COO, not my warden. He tasked you with running operations, not with running my life. You have used company resources to investigate a private citizen. You have manipulated information to serve your own agenda. You have attempted to blackmail me in front of my own board. You have fundamentally misunderstood your position. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle into the suffocating silence. The board members stared, stunned. This was not the aloof CEO they knew. This was a queen defending her territory. So, let me be perfectly clear, Isabella stated, her voice resonating with absolute power. My personal life is not up for discussion or review. My relationship with Leo Marco is not a negotiation. He is the best thing that has happened to me and my daughters in a very long time. She looked around the table, meeting the eyes of every man there. However, since my judgment is clearly in question, you leave me with a choice. If this board feels that I am no longer fit to lead this company because of the man I choose to have in my life, then I will tender my resignation, effective immediately. You can find a CEO whose personal life meets with your approval. Gasps could be heard around the room. The stock would plummet. It would be a catastrophe. But, she continued, holding up a hand to quell the rising panic, if I remain, there will be changes. We will start by removing the actual liability in this room. She looked directly at Mark Renshaw, whose face had turned a pasty, ashen gray. Mark, you're fired. Your access to this building is revoked, effective immediately. Security will escort you to your office to collect your personal belongings. I expect your company car, phone, and laptop to be on my desk by the end of the day. The finality of her words was absolute. It was a clean, brutal, corporate execution. Mark stood frozen for a moment, his mouth slightly agape, the architect of a failed coup. He had gambled everything on her weakness and had been annihilated by her strength. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the boardroom, a man who had just been erased. Isabella turned back to the stunned board. Are there any other questions regarding my judgment? There were none. The message had been sent. The queen had not just defended her king, she had checkmated the entire board. She had chosen her new life, and she would burn down the old one to protect it. The news of Mark Renshaw's abrupt termination sent a seismic shockwave through Vance Global and the city's tight-knit financial community. The official story was a sterile, corporate-approved statement about strategic restructuring, but the whispers told a different, more dramatic tale. Isabella didn't care. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, as if by surgically removing Mark, she had removed a part of her father's cold, critical legacy that had been embedded in her for too long. That evening, she found Leo not at his apartment, but in the small shared workshop space he rented by the hour in a drafty warehouse district. The air was thick with the clean, sharp scent of cedar. He was standing over a massive slab of raw oak, his brow furrowed in concentration as he drew a faint chalk line across its surface. He didn't hear her approach over the whine of a distant table saw. She simply stood in the doorway and watched him. Here, surrounded by his tools and the raw material of his craft, he was not the man from Mark's malicious report. He was not a charity case or an opportunist. He was a creator in his element, his posture confident, his movements sure and economical. He was a man at work, and she found the sight profoundly attractive. That looks heavy, she said, her voice making him jump. He turned, a slow smile spreading across his face when he saw her. Isabella, what are you doing here? I wanted to see where the magic happens, she said. stepping into the space. She ran a hand over a half-finished tabletop, feeling the smooth, sanded grain. "And I wanted to talk to you." He wiped his hands on a rag, giving her his full attention. "Is everything okay? You seem different." "I fired Mark today," she said. The statement simple, direct, and devoid of drama. Leo's eyes widened slightly. He said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "He tried to use you to corner me," she explained. "He presented a case to my board that you were a threat to the company, a liability. He tried to force me to choose." "And you did," Leo said softly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He saw the magnitude of what she had done, the risk she had taken, the definitive stand she had made. A wave of emotion washed over him, gratitude, humility, and a fierce, protective feeling he hadn't allowed himself to fully acknowledge until now. "I'm sorry you were put in that position," he said. "Because of me." "No," she countered, stepping closer to him. "This wasn't because of you, Leo. This was because of me. I let that culture of fear and suspicion fester for too long. You didn't create the problem. You just gave me the courage to finally solve it. You showed me what was real, and I chose the real thing." They stood in the quiet of the workshop, the air charged with unspoken feelings. He had seen her defend him with her actions, and it was a more powerful declaration than any words could ever be. But it also solidified a resolve that had been growing within him. "I can't be your project, Isabella," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "I won't be." The whispers I heard at that party, they were wrong about my motives, but they weren't wrong about my situation. I'm a man who is 5 days away from being evicted. I can't live off your generosity. My dignity, it's the only real asset I have left. I won't lose that." She nodded, her expression serious. She had anticipated this, hoped for it, even. "I would never ask you to," she said. "Which is why I didn't come here to offer you a gift. I came to offer you a business proposition." He looked at her, confused. "This," she said, gesturing around the workshop. "Your craft. It's not just a hobby, Leo. It's a high-end, bespoke skill. People pay fortunes for the kind of quality and artistry you produce. You're thinking like a craftsman, selling one piece at a time. I want you to start thinking like a founder." She laid out her vision with the clear, concise brilliance that had made her a billionaire. "I'm not going to give you money. I am going to invest in you. I propose we form a new company, Leo's Designs. Vance Global's private equity division will provide you with a formal business loan. It will cover a proper workshop, the best equipment, a small staff, and 6 months of operating capital. You will have a salary. It will have a structured repayment plan with a competitive interest rate. You will report to a board of 2. You and me." She handed him a sleek leather portfolio, a stark contrast to the one Mark had carried. Inside wasn't a dossier, but a fully fleshed out business plan, complete with market analysis, startup cost projections, and a 5-year growth strategy. Leo stared at the documents, stunned into silence. This wasn't charity. This was an opportunity. This wasn't a handout. It was a partnership. She wasn't saving him. She was empowering him. She was using her greatest strength, her business acumen, not to control him, but to build him up, respecting his need for agency and independence every step of the way. She was giving him a blueprint for his own future. "My dream," he whispered, looking at the pages. "This has always been my dream." "I know," she said softly. "I invest in founders with passion and a superior product. You, Leo Marco, are the safest investment I've ever made." A slow grin spread across his face, a look of pure, unburdened joy. "Okay, partner," he said, extending a sawdust-covered hand. She took it without hesitation, her smooth, manicured fingers lacing with his calloused ones. With the biggest hurdle cleared, the conversation shifted to the practicalities of their merging lives. Later that week, they sat on the floor of his apartment, the eviction notice, now a moot point, while the 3 girls played with the dollhouse, which had been carefully transported and given a place of honor in Maya's room. "I don't want to move into your house," Leo said, echoing her own thoughts. "It's beautiful, but it's not a home. It's a museum to your father's ego." Isabella nodded. "I agree. I've been thinking about selling it. We could find a new place. Something that's ours. Not mine that you move into or yours that I rescue you from. A place we choose together." The idea was thrilling, a blank slate, A home with a big yard, a warm kitchen, and maybe a separate state-of-the-art workshop for him out back. A place with no ghosts. They talked about schools, envisioning a place where all three girls could go together, where they would be known as sisters, not as the Vance twins and their less privileged friend. They discussed how to blend their parenting styles, her structured, scheduled world, and his more relaxed, intuitive approach. They discovered that their core values were identical. They both wanted to raise kind, resilient, happy children. They were drawing up blueprints for a family. It was a more complex and delicate project than any business plan or custom cabinet. It required honesty, compromise, and a deep mutual respect. They acknowledged the challenges ahead, the public scrutiny they would face, the complexities of blending their finances, the simple, everyday friction of building a new life from two very different paths. But for the first time, they were facing those challenges as a team. As they talked, Maya ran over to them, holding a tiny wooden chair from the dollhouse. One of the legs had snapped off. "Daddy, it's broken," she said, her lower lip trembling. Leo took the chair from her. "It's okay, little bird," he said gently, pulling a small bottle of wood glue from his toolbox. "Nothing is broken forever. Sometimes you just need the right tools and a little bit of patience to make it strong again." He held the tiny leg in place, his large, steady hands incredibly gentle. Isabella watched him, her heart full. He wasn't just talking about the chair, he was talking about them. They had all the pieces. They had the blueprints. Now all they had to do was start building. A single moment can be a ripple, changing the surface of a life. But sometimes, if the moment is powerful enough, it becomes a current, capable of redirecting the river itself. 1 year later, the grand opening of Leo's Designs was in full swing. The showroom, located in a beautifully restored brick building in the city's burgeoning design district, was bathed in warm light that gleamed off polished wood. The space was filled with Leo's creations: sleek dining tables with impossibly intricate inlays, elegant armchairs that looked like functional sculptures, and hand-carved art pieces that seemed to breathe with life. The air buzzed with the appreciative murmurs of architects, interior designers, and the city's elite, all sipping champagne and admiring his work. At the center of it all stood Leo Marco. He wore a tailored dark blue suit that fit him perfectly, but he hadn't lost the faint dusting of sawdust that seemed to be a permanent part of him. He moved through the crowd not with the swagger of a new celebrity, but with the quiet, assured confidence of a man who had found his purpose. He wasn't playing a part. He was simply himself, talking passionately about the challenges of working with reclaimed walnut or the unique properties of tiger maple. The man who once felt invisible was now the undeniable center of gravity in the room. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching him with a look of profound pride and love, was Isabella. She had changed too. The icy armor of the CEO was gone, replaced by a relaxed, open warmth that radiated from her. She still commanded Vance Global, but she did so on her own terms now. She had promoted a brilliant woman from within to serve as her COO, someone who valued innovation and empathy over fear. Her workdays now ended at a reasonable hour, her evenings reserved for what truly mattered. A small hand slipped into hers. She looked down to see Chloe, who was holding hands with Zoe on her other side, who in turn was holding hands with Maya. They were an inseparable, giggling unit of three, dressed in coordinating but not identical dresses. "Mommy, can we have one of the little cupcakes with the pink frosting?" Chloe asked, pointing toward a catering table. "Only if you promise to brush your teeth without arguing tonight," Isabella countered, her eyes twinkling. "I'll make sure of it," Maya said, with the solemn gravity of a 6-year-old making a sacred vow. Isabella laughed and sent them on their mission. They no longer lived in the glass castle. 6 months ago, they had sold it, and the proceeds had gone into a new charitable foundation Isabella had started, dedicated to funding community green spaces and supporting trade education programs, a perfect fusion of Elena's legacy and Leo's craft. Their new home was a beautiful, sprawling stone and timber house, nestled in a quiet, wooded suburb. It was a place with a soul, filled with light, laughter, and the happy chaos of 3 little girls. Its walls were covered in a mix of priceless modern art and finger-painted masterpieces, and out back, nestled among the oak trees, was the most advanced woodworking shop Leo could have ever dreamed of. It was their home, built on a foundation of mutual respect and love. Leo finished his conversation and made his way through the crowd toward her. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "So, what do you think, partner?" he murmured in her ear. "Good return on your investment?" "The best I ever made," she whispered back, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Though my favorite piece isn't in the showroom." "Oh yeah? Which one is that?" "The little wooden hawk that sits on my nightstand," she said softly. "The one you carved when you had nothing. It reminds me every day that the most valuable things are the ones that are never for sale." Es smiled, a deep, contented expression. He looked across the crowded room, then back at the woman beside him. He thought of the river, that turbulent, frightening force that had so nearly brought tragedy. It had been a river of despair for him, and a river of loneliness for her. But in its depths, in that single, selfless moment of connection, it had changed its course, bringing their two disparate worlds together. The final image is not of the glamorous party. It is of a quiet Sunday afternoon a week later in the backyard of their new home. Leo is at a small workbench, showing three little girls how to safely sand a small block of pine. Maya is showing Chloe the proper technique, while Zoe is trying to draw a face on the wood with a crayon. Isabella is sitting on the back steps, sipping a cup of coffee, watching them. She is not a billionaire or a CEO. He is not a celebrated designer or a hero. They are just a family. A man and a woman who found each other across a vast divide. Two lonely souls who built a bridge of trust and courage, and in doing so, created their own upstory. True wealth isn't what you have in the bank. It's the connections you build, the courage you show, and the love you have the bravery to accept. It's the bridges we build across the rivers that divide us. Thank you for watching Upstory. What do you think is the most important foundation for a relationship? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that happy endings are not just for fairy tales. We'll see you next time.